We're only games deep into the 2016 season, and USC has lost quite a bit already. Let's see, they lost a lot of pride in game one. They've lost 3 games, and Adoree Jackson lost a shoe, and that probably contributed quite a bit to this most recent loss. An excruciating game against Utah on the road, 31-27, after leading by a couple touchdowns in the second half. Nick Dempsey joins us from Conquest Chronicle to break this one down. Nick, wow, that last drive, 93 yards, a lot of fourth downs converted in the Trojans' demise.
Yeah, and breakdown, I think that's a great verb choice there. A lot of very interesting calls in that game from the USC coaches, particularly late. Clay Helton, if you'll recall, against Stanford, was down 3 touchdowns on their side of the field, opted to punt in the fourth quarter. This one, he was up by 3 points, and he was on the Utah 40, opted to punt and pin him back. That set up the last drive with Utah chewing up the last 5 minutes, and they went 91 yards, marched it right down the field, got themselves a touchdown. Part of what made that an interesting call is not necessarily they punted on fourth, and I believe it was 2, maybe 3. It was the fact that USC was moving the ball pretty well, and the USC defense was getting just torched. They had decided, another interesting coaching decision, they decided to go soft on pass coverage, weren't really getting a whole lot of pressure on the quarterback, which is normally what you need to do when you play soft in pass coverage. And the previous 2 drives, Utah scored touchdowns. I believe it was the previous 2, with relative ease. So Utah was moving the ball at will, and maybe Clay Helton should have gone for it there. At the very least, if Utah would have scored a touchdown from the 40 instead of their own 7, it might have left some time for Sam Darnold to try to score himself.
Yeah, but I agree with the thought, Nick, that they should have been a little bit more aggressive in pass defense or brought a blitz or 2 and mix things up. But just to sit back when there was that much time on the clock, there was 4+ minutes on the clock. There was plenty of time. Now, if you got a team squeezed down to, a minute 10 and they've got to go 93 yards, that's one thing. And then you can use the sideline to your advantage and the clock and stretching the series out to fourth downs and using the clock to your advantage. But that wasn't the case in this situation. And Troy Williams really stepped up in his only 4th start as a starting quarterback at Utah and made the plays.
Yeah, you got to give Utah credit. They did everything they needed to do. It wasn't pretty. At times, in fact, the start of this game was incredibly sloppy for both teams. But it's just inexplicable, some of these decisions that could have put USC in a much better position. They were up 2 touchdowns in terrible weather on a team that was running like 80% of the plays so far in that game. Should have been able to put it away. I know they still had most of the second half, but it's inexplicable to punt there, no less. Another interesting decision, and maybe there was an injury. I don't know what it was, but Justin Davis, the running back for USC, was killing it. I mean, he had a fumble on the very first possession of the game, and then after that, he was running wild all over everyone. I don't think he touched the ball in the fourth quarter. And maybe there was an injury, and we just didn't get a report from the sidelines. I don't know. But he was nowhere to be found after having an amazing average yards per touch. Perhaps you can confirm if you're looking at the numbers. I don't think he touched the ball in the fourth quarter. And when you're up 2 touchdowns, that seems like, and you're telling us, if you're Clay Helton and you're telling us, we're going to be a tough physical team, we're going to run the ball, we're going to take the lead, and we're going to run our 4-minute offense and kill clock and just run the ball down their throats. And then your top running back doesn't touch the ball in the fourth quarter when you got the lead. This is exactly the situation Helton said he was preparing the team for. And I don't know how to explain it. It's like they just went and decided to do everything the exact things they should not do in that situation. They went ahead and did all of those things. And they gave USC, once again, they did this a lot last year. They won handedly in the second and third quarter, but they lost in the fourth quarter. But again, give Utah credit. They did it. It takes some guts to march the ball down the field, go for it on fourth down. Was it 3 times that final drive? And get it each time. Whew, that takes some guts. And, hats off to them in that final touchdown.
And at least 2 or 3 of those times, they had a long third down. They had a penalty or a defensive stop behind the line of scrimmage by the Trojans that set them in a 3rd and long, a 3rd and 10, a 3rd and 15. Troy Williams having to play. You talked about the soft coverage against Adoree Jackson in particular on one of the long 3rd and 15s, and that set him up for a 4th and short, a 4th and a half yard, something like that. That was very manageable. They got the offensive line push. They converted each time. Justin Davis, was very prominently featured in 2 scoring drives, but 10 carries for $126. That's not a bad average. I think 12.6 usually is going to get the job done, but the 10 carries, not so much.
Yeah.
So unless there's something we don't know exactly, maybe he could have been a little bit more prominently featured throughout the second half.
I would have given him another whole 10 carries just in the 4th quarter at least, just to drive this game away. But they had him at the really sad part. I think you think back to this play, it was 3rd and 10. Utah was still on their own 7. They threw an incomplete pass that should have killed the drive and in theory killed the game, but Biggie Marshall got the pass interference call, gave them life, and Utah went right back to work gashing that soft coverage and just moving the ball right down the field. There's so many little things that again don't seem that big. It's the tide of this game. Where was Justin Davis? Why did you punt it on that 4th down? All these little things that keep just sort of building up cost them a game. And for a while there, they had the offensive line had finally cleaned up the penalties and were playing tight and actually looking sharp. And then that started to fade a little bit. But this is just, I think, what we saw in that 4th quarter, I think, was just symptomatic of the Clay Helton era, or at least so far this season for Clay Helton. This was the closest they've gotten to beating a Power 5 team, but they found a way to, what's that old phrase, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
When we previewed the game, Nick, of course, we talked about Tim Patrick, the #1 wide receiver for Utah, and USC being able to designate and find the guy that could possibly beat them, and they just put Adoree Jackson on him, and those guys went at it all night, and Jackson won a few matchups, Patrick won a few matchups. Adoree shut him out in the 1st quarter, and I marked it down in my notes. There was 10 minutes left in the 1st half when Patrick made his first catch, and it was a big one. It was a 40-yarder down the seam, and he's a 6'5" guy, and for as athletic and talented as Adoree Jackson is, he's only 5'11", and that proved pretty decisive in a few matchups, and Patrick caught 6 for 100. You mentioned the sloppy play out of USC. It's another thing I noted here. 3 consecutive drives they fumbled, and all 3 drives they were moving the ball. They had 50-some-yard drives all 3 times. They had already driven at 55 yards or so. All 3 of those drives had it going. Then they cough up the football. Yep.
And even if those drives would have stalled out in the red zone, like USC had a couple drives stall out there, that's still 6 points just on 2 of those 3 that they left on the field. There's your difference. And Adoree Jackson, I cannot say enough good things about that guy. That guy is, in a lot of ways, been the sole bright spot for this USC team. In a lot of ways, that kick return he had when they were down 7-0, USC had just fumbled. The start of the Sam Darnold era ended in a turnover. Utah seemed to just literally run the ball right down the field. I think they ran 11 or 12 straight run plays, scored a touchdown. Things were looking pretty bleak. And in a game so filled with momentum, and the impact momentum has on college football can't be understated. Adoree Jackson comes out, gets this return, puts the air right back in the balloon for USC. They were getting deflated, and you could see this thing already starting to slide downhill. Amazingly well in the secondary. I mean, just amazingly well. He was out on an island for a lot of that game against some really tough competition. Unfortunately, he just couldn't make that final play at the very end, the winning touchdown. And it wasn't for lack of coverage. It just the ground looked too wet, slipped right out from under him, took his shoe with him. He just couldn't make the pivot. So, Adoree Jackson had a heck of a night. He's had a heck of a season, and, you really, what else can the guy do at this point? But USC had their opportunities. This was not Adoree Jackson. You can't pin any one guy on this loss. This was everybody had that little small part to play in this defeat.
Nick, if Coach Helton made one good decision in this game, it was actually prior to the game, at least in my opinion, and that was naming Sam Darnold the starting quarterback, because the kid responded in his first game, considering the circumstances. I don't know if it was the wisest decision to make this his first career start on the road in a very tough environment against a very good defense, but in inclement weather, as it turned out. But he responded on 18 of 26 for 253, no turnovers. And I thought he showed tremendous poise, and he played better as the game went on, played really well in those second and third quarters, as the entire team did.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Helton was looking for a spark, and he certainly found one. Although he didn't throw any interceptions, but I can't remember if one of the early fumbles was his or not. But he made some great reads as a quarterback, some amazing reads, and his ability to move the pocket proved very, very valuable, especially when you've got an offensive line that's struggling. A lot of that opened up the passing game, and once you get the passing game going, that's how you get those big running lanes for, say, Justin Davis to get 12.5 yards a carry. Just you would think that this would have been a bad game for him. Like you said, heavy pass rush, the rain, on the road, but he did respond, and it definitely feels like offensive coordinator T. Martin is much more comfortable game planning with a mobile quarterback, that he can run tempo, that he can get a little run-pass option going. It seems like he is much, much more comfortable with a mobile quarterback than he was with the play calling for Brown. When Brown was in, a lot of the play calls just didn't make sense. T. Martin, I don't think, was just very comfortable calling up plays for a pocket passer. But now that he has a mobile quarterback, a lot crisper on offense for USC, and I have to give T. Martin credit. They seem to have gotten a guy that he can work with. But again, and they just couldn't finish the job. Up by 2 scores in the rain against a run-heavy team, a turnover-prone run-heavy team, and they couldn't finish. Somebody's going to have to get something figured out in that coaching staff, I have to say.
So for a fourth consecutive season, Utah starts 4-0. USC drops to 1-3. The one big credit I'm going to give to this team is that after losing and getting demolished by Alabama, 2 weeks later, they go to Stanford. They get outclassed. They come off the deck. They play well on the road. Bad weather. They could have folded the tents at some point in that game, but and they played really well. And I don't think they choked. I hate that term. Yeah. And I think it rarely applies, and I don't think it applies to this team in this game. The one last point I'll make on this one, and we can wrap it up, Nick, is that the play that could have really sealed it for USC is that they were up 24-10. Utah drove it down to the 1-yard line, and the ball went up in the air. They forced a fumble, and it was laying there in the end zone. And initially, just watching it live, I thought USC had the football. I saw a USC Trojan with the ball going to the ground, and I thought they had it.
Two different USC guys got their hands on that ball, and they didn't come up with it. And you're right. That probably was, once again, another little spot that doesn't seem necessarily, like a mind-blowing or like game-breaking thing, particularly with that much time left. But again, that goes differently. USC probably wins. I have to say, though, now is a critical juncture for USC. They've got a lot of home games coming up. USC and Clay Helton does really well in the Coliseum. Dreadful away on the road. So right now, this week's going to be important because one of the principal reasons, probably the principal reason they hired Clay Helton last year was because, they needed stability, they needed consistency. The players loved playing for him. He loved coaching them. What happens? You start out 1-3, and you kind of lost the players. You've lost the buy-in of those kids. You don't have their trust anymore. Now the principal reason for employing Clay Helton just went right out the window with that last second drive. So he's got to get these kids, keep these kids bought in, get them back, get on a nice little win streak coming up in October. We got majority of your games at home. Maybe even get on the the plus column and wins and losses. But this is going to be a critical week. They've got to get it turned around. They're coming back to the Coliseum where they play well. If they can't get the win coming up, I don't know. I would say throw any chances of a bowl game right out the window if they drop the 1-4. But I don't think they will. But this is a tough lesson to learn for a lot of folks on that squad. But important week now coming up. They're all pretty critical at this point for USC.
All right, Utah 31 and USC 27 as the Utes win it in the last drive of the football game in the closing 16 seconds. USC comes home, as Nick mentions, against Arizona State. Next game at the Coliseum, October 1st. Nick Dempsey of Conquest Chronicles helping us break down USC's loss to Utah. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Anytime, Mark.